Jim Harbaugh, and he was at Michigan during the early signing period. But today it's a totally different world with Sherrone Moore as the new leader of Michigan football. And while the incoming recruiting class hasn't taken much of a hit, being ranked 4th in the Big Ten and 16th nationally, there hasn't been much activity in the transfer portal, just 2 commits joining the Wolverines. Now, the Wolverines are 17th in the Big Ten in transfer portal rankings, which 17th in one conference is a crazy thing to say there. Is this a point of concern for you?
Okay, you could say it is, right? But let's just talk about what the transfer portal is. When you think about the transfer portal, guys that are entering the portal, usually they're trying to go from unknown to known. They're trying to go from instability to stability. They want, like, let's look at Caleb Downs, right? He was at Alabama, a great program. And then Saban leaves, and all of a sudden you have a little bit of instability and a little bit of unknown. So he goes to Ohio State, stability and known. So I'd say the positive thing is you could say, man, the portal has not been friendly to Michigan. But the flip side is true, is as they're in this transitional period, there's not a max exodus of players either. I think that's a positive point in this. They've maintained a very sound and solid recruiting class.
I think we still got 2 weeks of that portal being open, a lot of spots open on that defense. So
I will say I want to reserve the right. Let's take a look at this after spring. Let's see where the program's at going into fall camp.
Okay. I think the spring thing is more interesting, not for who they can get to come into the program, but who might make a decision to leave after spring, because that would be the first taste of this new staff and in its current form and how the players feel about that. There was a comment up there on the screen that I do want to bring back from Mark Carman, because this is something that I wanted to talk about, and I'm glad he brought it up there. It says, Jake, can you address Michigan's inability to seize on the recruiting momentum of 3 consecutive Big Ten titles in a national championship? Before you get there, the thing that stands out in my mind about all the things we're talking about with Michigan is I don't think that there has been a scenario in history where a bag has been fumbled harder after winning a national title. And it's not Chiron Moore's fault, but everything that's happened, Jim Harbaugh, he's being out there, do we know, do we not know? Now you got to go and try to hire, but he's taking more coaches off the staff. You can't get the NIL aligned. And it feels like there was a huge opportunity here that nobody's even talking about, because it's like we already missed it.
Yep, and there's a few things working here. I think number one is the fact that as successful as Jim Harbaugh was, every offseason he's flirting with the NFL. And it's hard to pitch to recruits and look the parents in the eyes and say, I got your son. I'm going to take him from a 16-year-old boy and turn him into a man. He's going to get a quality education, and I'm going to make sure he reaches his full potential on the football field. When all the headlines are saying Jim Harbaugh's gone, obviously now we know he is gone. He's the coach of the LA Chargers. You mentioned NIL. That's a big piece of this. Chiron Moore can desire to have NIL all he wants.
Right.
He can pitch that to his staff and to recruits. But there has to be alignment from above Chiron Moore.
Right.
And I think Michigan has been hesitant, though they've certainly embraced NIL, to fully embrace NIL. We talk about Ohio State putting up 8 figures to their roster this year. Michigan hasn't done that. I've yet to see that. And the last piece is I know this is true. It's not an excuse. It is a reality. There is an academic handcuffing that I know firsthand has at least affected some big-name recruits with Michigan.
Yeah, I think that should be a thing of the past, if we're going to be completely honest about this. I think you have to address the fact that the football program is the doorstep of the university, and that's the first thing that a lot of people see. And you can attract some of the brightest students academically if you have great athletic programs, so you might have to sacrifice by letting a couple of kids in there that wouldn't have qualified.
And if they fail, it's kind of, you don't let them fail. And just say, we're not going to let you fail.
And quite frankly, the merit to qualify as an athlete to me is because you're a good athlete. Like, you have to be a competent student here, but let's not act like they should be like everybody else on campus. So that's number one there. Number two, the NIL thing I think is super intriguing, because I had told you Ohio State's NIL situation was a disaster. It was miserable until they watched Michigan win. Now, all of a sudden, it's like, okay, we got some alignment going here. Maybe we're going to embrace this a little bit more. Maybe we're going to make the connections, what it allowed them to do. Obviously, the high school recruiting class was one thing, but it allowed them to get impact transfers into Ohio State, knowing that a guy like Quinshon Judkins now is doing ad campaigns for Speedway or Marathon gas stations or whatever the case is.
Huge.
When you're aligned like that, you can get the dudes in the door. And that's the thing that Michigan's going to need if Chiron Moore is going to pick this recruiting thing up.
I think the frustrating part for Michigan fans is and you can give me your Ohio State's perspective. It felt like up until Jim Harbaugh left, that Michigan had their foot on the throats of the Buckeyes.
100%.
And they were suffocating them slowly. And then you win the national title, and there's this very high. And now here we are. I love the national title. It's a great thing. But we have to be realistic about where the program's at right now. There's uncertainty. As far as the transfer portal goes, you need coordinators to pitch to transfer portal guys that you'll fit in our scheme. Who's the DC at Michigan? We don't even know.
It's funny you mention that because I think a lot of Ohio State fans started off this offseason saying, well, 44 seniors, a lot of those guys aren't going to be there. So, we might be the more veteran team next year and have a chance. Then it transitioned into, well, Jim Harbaugh's gone, so now the boogeyman's out of Ann Arbor.
Yes.
Then it went to, well, Jesse Minter's not going to be there anymore. And now we're looking, Elston's not there anymore. And it's like Sherrone's hiring a bunch of unknown guys from within. They might be quality coaches, not to be an indictment on those guys. But
sure,
it feels like the moves that have been made in Ann Arbor only make Buckeye fans feel better about themselves at this point. And it's got to play out on the field, but that type of momentum, you can't let that swing after a national title win.
I completely agree. And I think it's a great benchmark to know if you're heading in the right direction. Do the moves you make your rival uncomfortable?
How do your rivals feel about what you're doing?
When Chiron Moore goes forward on 4th down in the Big House this year, Ryan Day sweating.
Yep.
When Ryan Day punts it, Michigan's saying, thank God, Ryan.
Yep.
Thank God, Ryan Day. Do things that make your biggest rival a little bit uncomfortable.
We
right?
talked about it. I told you, people in Ohio State were rejoicing when they heard that Jim Harbaugh was going to be gone. Like, that made them feel good. And it's not to say that Sherrone cannot be a good coach. But it was everything that Jim Harbaugh did. And it was all the experience and the way that he was able to build the staff and to really develop. That's what scared people, and Sherrone has not proven that he can do that as a head coach.
And that's the fact of the matter, is it's an unknown at this point. Not saying it will or won't. It's just an unknown.